And now we're on Daf Chav Ches Amid Beis. And the Gemara is explaining the following. Tana di Tana Kama Sova Keved is Dirik Allah Dam. Once there was a Zrikas Adam on one of her korbanos, Li'alter Shari B'chamra. She's immediately muteres b'yayin v'holesli nivel, and therefore it's no longer a neder or an use of ini nefesh, and that's why the Baal cannot be meifir. And Rabbi Akiva is going to set up that cutoff point that is mafkia, that removes the Baal's ability to be meifir at an earlier time. Rabbi Akiva Sabra Filu Ishtechitas Behema Eino Yochel Lahafer. Even if all that happened was the shechita of one of the behemos of Hark 3 karbanos, the Baal now has to terminate, or we terminate his ability to be made. For Mishum Hefseid Kodshim. If the Baal would be allowed to be made for Hanazirus, and we would validate his hafara, then at that point, the carbon would be lost. That would be equivalent to what's called chata shemesu balel. And what does it mean? We're going to take the basar after the shechita. We're going to have to get rid of it. There's no way that you can be matir the achila here because it's chata shemesa. It has to go, and be destroyed. And in order to avoid that destruction and that bizayin of kodshim, we're mafkia the Baal's ability to be mefer the naziris of his wife. So Maskifla, Rav Zera now is going to object to this explanation of Rabbi Akiva. And he says the following: Lizrok Daman Shalol Lishman. So this is already a sugya at the beginning of Masechet Zvachim about Shechita Shalol Lishma. And if, argues Rabbi Zera, the Kohen would now shech the korban not for the purpose of a korban Nazir, then Yatir Basar B'Achilu. That Zrika of Shalol Lishman would be Matir the Basar. How do we know such a thing? Milo Sanya, because we learned in a brayso, Kivsei Atzeres. So on Chag HaShavuos, we bring 2 Kivsei Shlomim, and the brayso says that Sheshachtan Shalol Lishman, he shechted these Kivsei Atzeres for a different korban. Or alternatively, he shechted it for this korban, but Shachtan Lifnei Zmanim Oli Achar Zmanim, he shechted before Shavuos, before the Chag, or after Shavuos, after the Chag, is Adam Yizorik V'Basar Yochel. We can still go ahead and be Zorik the Dam and eat the Basar. And we'll burn the Emurim and eat the Basar. Now we have to add one point over here. Again, if we're mentioning the first Mishnah in Zvachim, it's Ein HaKarban Ol L'Shem Chovas Shalmi Atzeres. They'll have to replace this korban if the Zrika was Shalol Lishma with a different set of 2 kvasim for Shalmi Atzeres, for Kivsei Atzeres. And that's the general principle of Kol HaKarban Shedish Shalol Lishma Einam Ol L'Shem L'Bailam L'Shem Chovasa. Here the Bailam of the Tzibur. Im Hoisa Shabbos, okay, we can't do Zrikas Adam on Shabbos because that's an Isa Drabana and it looks like Makav Patish. So let's say there's an overlap now between Atzeres and Shabbos on that particular year. Lo Yizrok, he cannot be Zorik the Dam, because that would be like Makav Patish or like Tikkun Mona. It's being Matir, the Korban, Laktor Lachilu. We don't do this on Shabbos according to the Gzera D'Rabbanan. But If he went ahead and Zorak, and he was Zorak the Dam on Shabbos, which he shouldn't have done, then Hurtza, the Zrika is meaningful and valid. And now the Karban is Mutal Haktir Esai Murim, right? Those parts of the Karban that goes on the age, that we can be Matir. La Erev, on Motzei Shabbos. So that's when he's going to do, that's what he's going to be Matir the Murim. Anyway, we see clearly from this brisa that you can be Zorik the Dam of Karban Shelo Lishman. And here too, therefore, in an Isha, that the Baal was Mefer, Har, Nazir. So after the Shechita, the Karban was done, we could be Zorik the Dam, Shelo Lishma, and we could be Matir thereof, the boss of Achila. So this is not a Hefsei Kodshim, this is not a Bizayin to Kodshim, we're going to be Matir the Kodesh Achila. So why did Rabbi Akiva say that the Baal cannot be Mefer after Shechita because of Hefsei Kodshim? Let's just advise the Kohen to do the Zrika Shelo Lishma. And the Gemara answers, Amri, they said the following. If you're talking about a case of what is Shachat, Olo, Shlomim, Achinamim. If we're talking about a case where there was a Shechita of Olo and Shlomim, then you're right, Ef Shal Lizok Sadam Shelo Lishma, and to be Matir the Karban Lakrova as an Olo. Or Lachila in the case of Shlomim. So this is not considered Hefsei Kodshim, but that's not what Rabbi Akiva is talking about. What's the Rabbi Akiva in our Mishnah discussing? He shechted the chatos first. And we'll have Machlokas Tanoim later on Daf Mem Hey about the Seder Shchitas Karbanos and Nazir. And according to Rabbi Lazar, he shechts the chatos first. And that's in order to be Mata Giluach, because Giluach depends upon the Chatos. All right, but we're going to have to get to that much later on, towards the end of the Masechet. But in any event, if the case of Rabbi Akiva and our Mishnah was that they shechted the Chatos first, now there's going to be Hefsei Kodshim. We cannot be Zorik the Dam of Chatos Shelo Lishma. That's where Chatos and Pesach at the beginning of Masechet Zvachim are different than all other karbanos. And all other karbanos, if you do the Zrika Shelo Lishma, you can salvage the karban. Again, Ein Abayim Ola L'Shem Chova, but you can salvage the karban and it's B'Kedusha Sayakai. But not in the case of a Chatos. Chatos that was done Shelo Lishma is Psula. And therefore, you cannot bring it as an Idava. And in addition, I should say, you cannot bring it as a dava because chatas ain't about a dava. So you're left in an impossible situation here. We're going to have to just throw out the basar. So now it comes out that Rabbi Akiva is talking about a case where the chatas was shechted first. Now we have to assume that Tanakama is also talking about a case where they shechted the chatas first. The premise is that the debate that's recorded here between Rabbi Akiva and the Tanakama is referring to the same scenario, the same identical mitzius. Now, the Tanakama holds that it's only after Zrika Saddam that the Baal's Koach Hafar is Mufka. Because at that point, after Zrika, she is allowed to drink wine, and there's no longer a status of the Nazir says Inui Nefesh, and therefore the Baal can't be Mefer. So the Gemara now is going to clarify that even in this case where the Dam Chatas was subject to Zrika first, the first of the three karbanos, then she is allowed to drink wine immediately after Hagiluach, and there's no Ini Nefesh. The Baal cannot be made for a Nazir's Kirisnan, as we learned in the Mishnah later on Daf Memei, Im Gilach al Achas Mishloshtan, if the Nazir underwent Tiglachas Nazir after one of the three karbanos was brought, Yotza. So even though the Giluach was on the Chatos, nevertheless, she's allowed to drink wine. And therefore the Baal can no longer be made for Nidarim. After Zrika Saddam, it's no longer Inu Nefesh. And now we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "B'medvar Amurim." When do we say that after Zrikas Adam, the Baal can no longer be mefer? That's b'tiglachas tara, b'tiglachas tuma yafer, because she's going to have to undergo another set of 30 days of Nazirus. Rabbi Meir Omer, afilu b'tiglachas tara yafer. Even in the case of tiglachas tara, and there was Zrikas Adam, the Baal could still claim it's inu nefesh, and he could be mefer. Why? I don't want to live with a woman whose hair is cut off. I like her hair. So what does the Tanakama counter argue? Tanakama Amalacha Efshar B'Pei Nachris. She could wear a sheitel, and he doesn't have to say that, oh, it's menuvel and she's menuvelis, I don't want to live with her, it's inu nefesh. No. She'll wear a sheitel. Some women look okay in a sheitel. And by the way, many poskim, based on this Gemara that we're learning today in the Daf, are matir wearing a pei nachris. Rabbi Meir Sober, he's not such a big fan of a sheitel, not on a halachic level, but on an aesthetic level. The Baal can still say that her giluach is a nivul. I'd rather her natural hair that's attached to her head than a sheitel. Why? Because when she's wearing a pei nachris, so there's some amount of zuama. I guess hair always has zuama. That's why if you scratch your head, you're supposed to wash your head. And if she's wearing the hair of another woman, I guess this was before synthetic sheitlach, then there's a zuama from another woman, and he's very sensitive to that. Maybe he's a little bit of a mafunak. Other Rishonim say a little bit differently, that that he just doesn't think that she looks good in a pei nachris. I mean, to comb a pei nachris and keep it beautiful is not the same as her natural hair, blah, blah, blah. So therefore, it's still considered inui nefesh. And that leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Daf Chav Chesam and Beis. This is the famous Mishnah, at least according to Reish Lakish's interpretation of the Mishnah, of Chinuch Banim. Ha'ish madir es beno ben Nazir. A father can impose Nazirus on his son who's a katan, either by saying Yehei b'ni Nazir, or he commands his son to be makabel on himself Nazirus. V'yeino isha, but a mother is not authorized maderes es beno ben Nazir to impose Nazirus on her son. Now the Tosfos takes out the next word, Ketza. Gilach, what happens if after the father was makabel Nazirus on his son, the son himself went ahead and cut his hair, indicating that he's not interested in being a Nazir, or Shegilchu Krova, or some of his relatives, he has Machlokas Rishonim, whether it means the relatives that are Apostle Liedus, or it means any relatives, even more distant relatives. They cut off his hair, this son, and that's considered a mecha. It's as if they objected to his son being a Nazir. Micha, or alternatively, let's say the son made an explicit protest. He's not interested in the Nazirus, or Shemichu Krovov, or his relatives made a declaration they're not interested in his Nazirus. In all these cases, the Nazirus is betela. So the Giluach or the Mecha, says the Rosh, has to be immediate after the father heard after they heard that the father was Madir, his son, B'Nazirus. If when they heard it, they decided, let's think about it, and they didn't make a protest, and then later on, they want to do a Mecha or a Giluach, the Nazirus is Chal. Hoisa lo behema ufreshes. If the father had already designated Karban for the Nazirus of his son, and then there was a Mecha, and therefore the Nazirus is Batel, it's Betela. So what do you do with that? Chatos, right? There are three Karbanos, one of which is a Chatos, Tamus, that's called Chatos Shemesu Balel. Ha'ola tikrov ola, ushlamim yikrov ushlamim. However, there's such a thing as a carbon and dava, both with regard to a carbon ola and with regard to a shlamim. So we'll bring these karbanos that were designated for the Nazirus of his son as a carbon nedava, whether it's been olas nedava or shalmei nedava. However, nechalim liyom echad, even though shalmei carbon shalom in general is 2 days, but not of the achilus, but not in this case where it's a next generation of shalmei nazir. It's like there's a propelling force here that this was designated as a shlomim for nazir, and a nazir only gets 1 day. However, einam tunim lechem. Normally a nazir brings lechem, but not in this case because it's not a carbon of Nazirus. Hayulo mos tumin. Let's say the father was mafresh mos for the karbanos of Nazirus, and this halacha that we're about to learn is not limited just to the case of a father and a son. It would apply in general. In a case where, let's say, after he was mafresh mos, he died. And we're talking about stumin. So he did not designate which specific mos should go for a chatos. It's then yiplul nedava. We'll take these mos and we'll purchase an olas nedava. But mos meforashim, if he specified while he was alive, he said these mos are for a chatos, etc., then what's the din of these mos? Is the mei chatos yelchul yamamel. The dmei chatos, like the behemoth itself, which has to die, the dam has to be thrown into the yamamel, has to be destroyed. And with regard to, we'll get to the Olad Shlom in a second, but first, lo nenim v'lo molim. These mos are osir bana midrabanan. And lo molim, there's no chiyuv karma me'ila if he violated the Isur Hana. Because in Parshas Me'ila it says Kodshei Hashem, and Tmei Chasazu Holchim Liyam HaMelech, it's not Kodshei Hashem. However, Tmei Ola Yaviu Ola, Umolim Behem, and Tmei Shlomim Yaviu Shlomim. Again, it doesn't say Molim Behem in Shlomim because there's no Me'ila in Shlomim. But as far as the Tmei Ola, the most that were designated can now be used for an Ola, and that's an Olas Nedava. And there's going to be Me'ila because we're going to be makriv of the Olas Nedava on the Mizbeach. But Tvei Shlomim, although there's no Me'ila in Shlomim, but nevertheless, Nechal Liyom Echad V'enam Te'unim Lech. So the Gemara says, Ish in. It says in the Mishnah that a man can be Makabel Nazirus for his son, implying that Aval Isha lo, but the mother not. Doesn't say anything about a mother. On the contrary, what am I saying? It says, Ein ha'isha mader says b'no b'nazir. My timer, why should we differentiate between the father and the mother? That's the way we received Aloch Moshe Sinai. The Av has the koach to be mother's b'no, but not a mother. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Chanina. Here we turn to Daf Chav Tes Amar. In the name of Reish Lakish, Kidei lechancho b'mitzvos, that the reason why a father could be mother his son in Nazirus is a takonis chachamim for the purpose of chinuch, lahargil es haben b'mitzvos. So the Gemara immediately asks, Yochi afilu isha nami, a mother is also obligated to be margil her son b'Nazirus, and the Gemara answers, because so Reish Lakish holds, ish chayv l'chanich es b'no b'mitzvos, Vienna isha chayeves lechanech es b'na b'mitzvos. And on this, Amir Tzashem, I'll give a share tomorrow at 8:30. Okay, then. So this is where we're going to stop here on Daf Chav Tes Amid Aleph, and I will wish you a good day and a chodesh tov, and Mishanichnas Ador Marbim b'simcha.